service to our nation and service to our country. And so that's why I am so excited today to have our panelists joining us to really celebrate our military personnel. These are amazing servicemen and women who are doing an incredible job in increasingly difficult circumstances. And they are doing this for those of us in the civilian life. We have little or no understanding of what they do and how they do it. But it is critical for maintaining our wellness, our well-being, and our safety. And so we wanted to say to all the military past and present, really thank you so much for your service. And we're here to support you and your families. And this is part of why we've put together this Lunch and Learn. And we are delighted and honored to have our three panelists today. So we have the Colonel J.P. Farnam, retired. We have Lieutenant Commander George Banks, retired. And then we have Personal Specialist First Class Oscar Rogers, who's in active duty. And these are three of our military finest. I can tell you that already. We want this to be like a full Q&A session, just free-flowing, ask your questions, whatever they may be. And just feel free and ask anything that you think would be helpful, either from a civilian perspective or from a military perspective. Today, we're really focusing in on advancing careers in the military. This is our first part. And then our next part on June 7th will be transitioning, how to successfully transition from the military and into civilian life. So please be sure to join us there as well. So welcome to everyone. Let's just bow our heads for a quick prayer. Dear God, we want to thank you for your service, and we want to thank you for your sacrifice. May this be a wonderful and enriching time together. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Awesome. Okay, so I will be serving as both a moderator and a panelist, but before we get started, I'd like to just say, let's all give a warm hand clap and thank you for Esther for putting this on for us. Thank you so much. So first, I have the pleasure of introducing our special guest panelist, Mr. John Farnam, J.P. Farnam. He currently serves as the Chief Operating Officer at RET Therapeutics, but he's bringing more than 30 years of operations and leadership experience to the team. Prior to that, he completed 26 years in the United States Marine Corps as a weapons and sensors officer, and he flew the illustrious FA-18 Deltas, the premier fighting aircraft for all the military services in the Navy and the Marine Corps. During that time, he served as a weapons school instructor, FA-18 Delta Squadron Commanding Officer, and finally as the Commanding Officer of Marine Corps Air Station Miramar, San Diego, California. Additionally, he completed 2 tours at the Pentagon, the first at the Marine Corps Staff, Aviation Staff for the FA-18 Requirements Officer, and the second for the Chairman Joint Chiefs of Staff focused on U.S. military global posture. After his Marine career, he transitioned into the civilian career, and he served in the sector as a few different jobs, the first being the Vice President of Business Operations for Celgene Receptos, and that's where I believe he met Esther, so that's when they first started their relationship, where he led the business operations and administrative functions and professional leadership development. He oversaw clinical operations, medical writing and program management, and he managed a $300 million annual budget. Following that, he went to Cura Oncology as their Chief Operating Officer, where he cultivated a culture of empowered leadership and accountability within the team. Following that, he went on to become the Vice President of U.S. Operations at Imaging Biopharmaceuticals. And then finally, his current job that he serves in now is as a Chief Operating Officer of RET Therapeutics, where he oversees non-scientific company operations, including budget development and execution, finance, human resources, legal, contracting, business development, and all intellectual properties. And that's just a very small amount of his bio. So, you know, there's more stuff that he's done. Amazing guy. We're very happy to have you. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, that's a mouthful right there. Thank you for that. So the first thing you learn about the military is our biographies are long. We write down everything we ever do, it seems like, right? And they put it in there. So I get the honor here of introducing Oscar. And I got a chance to read Oscar's bio a little while back. And the reason I joined the military, the reason I became a Marine, was to work with people like Oscar, and it's reflected in this bio. So I'm going to go through this here in a minute. And I want to make sure you understand, when it says where he was and what he was doing, kind of like, what does that really mean? What's behind that? Because it's easy to say it, but when you understand the what and the why and what it takes to do that, you really get appreciation for the person that's doing that. So Oscar was born in Selma, Alabama in 1987, right? And he lived there as a young man. So he and I were talking earlier. I got to Pensacola, Florida in 1991, which is 175 miles due south of Selma. So, and Pensacola is where I first really started to learn how to sweat, right? Because of how hot it is all the time and how humid it is. So, and I was in my 20s, but he started day one and learned how to do that. I perfected it in Beaufort, South Carolina some years later, but it all started in Pensacola. So in our lives, we weren't too far apart. He said he traveled to Pensacola a couple times in that time frame, so maybe we were there together. And I know in a training airplane, because I was at flight school, that I flew over Selma many times. So I think we probably weren't but a mile or two apart more than once. So I think that's pretty cool. Best part about Oscar is he did other things in his life. He started going down a path of being working in a pharmacy. He had a career there, but somewhere along the line he decided that he wanted to do something more exciting. Would you call it? Get out of your comfort zone, right?
Get out of the comfort zone. Get
uncomfortable. And he did that and joined the Navy. And that's a big step for a kid from Selma, Alabama, to make a decision to join the Navy and then go on that adventure that's going to happen. That happened in February 2011. He went to recruit training and graduated, went to his MOS school, or his mission school. They taught him how to do his job, and that was in Meridian, Mississippi. So not too far from home, though, right? Not too far. Yeah. So anyway, that's great. And then he ended up right now, he's sitting here with us. He's got his associate's degree from National University. So that kind of describes him a little bit as a person, what got him to the Navy and who he is. I'm pretty excited about that. So he started off in a personal support detachment afloat in a place called Diego Garcia. Anybody heard of Diego Garcia? Yeah. Sounds a lot like San Diego, but it is not, right? It is in the middle of the Indian Ocean. There's a rock out there, and you got to be motivated to do there and do well, right? And a little bit in our sermon today, talk about being planted. In the military, we talk about bloom where you're planted. Wherever they put you, do the best you can do, and whatever that is, whether you like it or not. And I think that aligns a lot with the words I heard earlier today. So I felt that really reached out to me. So he did that in Diego Garcia, and then was transferred from there. Well, he got promoted to a third-class petty officer, right? Big step, because that steps up from a young sailor to a non-commissioned officer. And what happens with that in the military is the levels of responsibility start to go through the roof. And if you haven't figured it out yet, in the military, there's more to be done than there are people to do it. And we end up piling these tremendous responsibilities on what truly are very, very young people. And we don't do it to see if they can do it. We do it because we have no choice. They have to perform. So he performed, and you'll hear more about that here in a moment. So then he moved off to the Navy Operations Center just up north here a little bit in Los Angeles. Was that your first trip to the West Coast, really? Yeah. Don't sweat nearly as much in LA as you do in Alabama, I'll tell you that. And once again, in that time frame, he was promoted probably just a few years, right, to second class, right? So he's getting fast promotions in the Navy, and that doesn't happen by accident. They just don't promote people because they want to. They promote people that need to be promoted. And for promotions, there are boards. They look at your record book. It's all very competitive, and every promotion is a statement about who you are as a person and how you are as a leader. And so Oscar clearly hits that every single time. And then in September of 2015, Oscar got a job working for the 7th Marine Regiment, right? 7th Marines out of 29 Palms, California, which is definitely not Alabama, right? For sure. It's as far from Alabama as you can get. Yeah. So in the Navy, there are a few jobs that spend time with the Marine Corps. You see a corpsman. Marine Corps love their corpsmen, right? Because they take care of us. And then you got personnel support that do the same, right? And they show up. And so he spent his time with the Fleet Marine Force, which is, talk about get out of your comfort zone, right? And Marines have a different way of thinking, I'll tell you. And we love our Navy brothers for sure. But to live in somebody else's environment like that is definitely a stretch, and that's something great. And while he was there, he earned his Fleet Marine Forces warfare specialist qualification. And that's something special that those in the Navy that spend time in the Marine Corps leave with this. And it does change them a little bit because it gives you perspective from a whole different approach, even though we're both seafaring and talk the same language, but sometimes we talk the same language in a different way. So that's exactly right. And then while he was there, he deployed in what's called a Marine Air Ground Task Force. So this is a special purpose Marine Air Ground Task Force. We got big names for all kinds of things. MAGTAF they call it. And what a MAGTAF is a ground element, so that infantry guys, aviation element, so all those guys that fly airplanes, and there's all different kinds, helicopters and fixed wing, and then a supporting element, engineers, logistics. I suspect you were part of that element as well. Is that right?
GCE.
Oh, GCE, even better. So with that, he took everything that was being a Marine at 29 Palms, and he took it overseas. In fact, he went to the Middle East, and he went to Kuwait with that, and saw the Marine Corps function for its true purpose. And so, once again, great respect for someone that spends time doing that. Because it's one thing to think about it, it's another thing to find yourself in the deserts of Kuwait doing it. It's a whole different world, right? And when he talked about getting out of your comfort zone, very little comfort about living in a place like that. And let me tell you, I can assure you that's the case. He came back. He got promoted again in there, right? First class, which is huge. And that last promotion was a meritorious promotion. Everybody know what a meritorious promotion is? That's when you get promoted early because of who you are. So you don't get promoted along the lines, just regular promotion says something about you, but to be meritoriously promoted means you're above and beyond. And I will tell you, the crowd that he runs in, hard to stick your head up above that crowd and do it in a way where you're still humble, because he's such a humble man. Look at him. Right now he's wishing I would stop talking about it, right? So it says a lot about his personality, and however you grew up, they did it right. I'll tell you, that's for sure. And then along the way, they made him Sailor of the Year, 2018, right? Yeah. And I think that's magnificent, and things coming there. So then he moved on a little bit more. He left the Marines, and he came here to San Diego. He was, on a number of occasions, Sailor of the Quarter, and then he was Sailor of the Year again, I think he was Sailor of the Quarter 2020 a couple of times, and he's worked here. So what that just means, though, is his jobs have grown and grown and grown in responsibility. And to give you an idea of the number of people that rely on him to do the job that he does now, and I'll tell you, I think it's a thankless job. It really is. People don't think about it until they need something, and then they're angry, and it takes a little bit to make that right. But there are over 2,300 people here in San Diego that rely on him to do the job that he does and the team that he has, because what that does is it makes their life right, where they don't worry about all the supporting mechanisms, all the things that, from paychecks to promotions and everything in between, all that just happens, and they can go to work and get their job done. And I'll tell you, as a commanding officer in Miramar, and as a colonel in the Marine Corps who really appreciate him doing that job, the people like me that are doing that job, because they don't need their sailors worried about all of that. They need Oscar to do his job so it gets done, and clearly Oscar does his job. So it is an honor for me to sit here next to you. I really appreciate the 42 minutes I got to tell everybody about you, and I look forward to what we're going to talk about.
Yes, sir. I have the illustrious privilege to introduce to some and present to others Lieutenant Commander retired George Banks. So some of you may know, but George is a native of Moreno Valley, which I found out he was born in Anaheim, and talking about the overlap. When I was stationed in LA, I lived in Anaheim, so the overlap is there. Anyway, so he joined the military as a nuclear machinist mate in October of '99. He graduated with his bachelor's from Thomas Edison State College in '09 and earned his officer commission. So he went to officer candidate school where it's like a mini, 13 weeks for OCS? 13-week mini boot camp all over again, because he came in and enlisted and went through a boot camp and redid it in 2009. He served on a lot of ships, and people with my rate, we call it those floating things on the water. So he served on aircraft carrier John C. Stennis, also known as the CBN-74, where he was the reactor mechanical division work center suit. I know that's a mouthful. I know that doesn't make sense to a lot of you guys, but on these carriers, they're all nuclear powered, and they have down on the, I think it might, on one of the lower decks of the ship, because I've never been on them, so I don't want to. Yeah, it's really hot down there from the people that I've talked to, and he was the person telling the people that were sweating their lives away what they needed to do, and he was the person normally when the deployments got extended, he had the illustrious privilege to let them know that, hey, it's surf and turf, so we'll be out here for a few more months. He served, like I said, the CVN 74, and then he served on a DDG 90, how do you say that, Chaffee, the USS Chaffee, where he was the anti-submarine warfare officer. So he was out here looking for those subs. That's what his boat did, and he was the assistant weapons officer. He was the fire control officer on the LCS-10, USS Gabriel Giffords, combat systems officer and operation officer aboard that ship. He also deployed to the Arabian Gulf in support of Enduring Freedom, Global War on Terrorism, and he supported both the U.S. 7th Fleet and 4th Fleet on various multinational exercises, ballistic missile defense, and counter-drug trafficking operations. He served at the training command for littoral combat ships, where he was the Force Combat Systems officer, and he also was at Naval Surface Forces Pacific. I used to the short name is SURFPAC, where he was the nuclear recruiter and recruiting division at the Naval Recruiting District in San Diego. He reported as the inaugural executive officer, short term is XO, for Surface Combat Systems Training Command LTF Pacific in October of 2022, and you retired in 2024, December of 2024. He has received 2 Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medals, 5 NAMs, which is a Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal, amongst other various unit awards, campaign medals, and service awards. I present to you Lieutenant Commander retired George Banks.
Okay, so I will have the pleasure of acting as both a panelist and I will also be moderating as well. So I'll be out there taking your questions or bringing the mic to anybody. So we have our gentleman up here and we're here to answer any questions you may have. But I'm going to start it off with one question for the group to get us rolling, and then anybody who has a question, please raise your hand and I will come to you with the microphone. So since we were starting to talk about future-proofing, at what point in your career did you start future-proofing yourself? And then how did you go about doing that throughout your career?
I would actually say I started future-proofing in Diego Garcia. So part of being in the military in general is you have to make sure you find good mentors within the military. And I was able to do that at my first command. And I had 3 or 4 people telling me, because I went to Auburn, they were like, why don't you just finish your degree? Like I joined the Navy so I wouldn't have to go to school. But eventually I listened and I started to kind of see the wave in which higher education was really the way to go, especially in America. So I started, part of future-proofing is educating yourself. So I began, the Navy had a restriction. We got this thing called tuition assistance, but at the time you had to be serving for 3 years before you were eligible for tuition assistance. And tuition assistance is simply, you trade time for like the payment of education. So you had to give them 3 years, and then they'd start paying for you to go to school. It started off as 10 classes a year, it's down to 6 now, but I've since gotten my associates in general education, and I'm only 5 classes currently away from my bachelor's in business administration with a concentration in business law. So that's only the educational piece of future-proofing, I would say. But the best education comes from self-education, because it's normally the things that you are seeking out. So I read or listen to on Audible a lot of leadership books. I know one of our CNOs had a reading list for all his sailors, And one of the books that was on there was Lincoln on Leadership. So it's basically Abraham Lincoln's ideals about leadership. And once I read that book, it really transformed the way I saw people. Because when you're in a large organization such as the Navy, you kind of see people as, this is gonna sound bad, as things to get a job done. But with Lincoln on Leadership, it kind of taught me about getting to know the actual person before getting to know the sailor. So if you get to know the person, and let's say I worked with George and he came in a certain way every day, and then one day he didn't, if I wasn't able to learn these different things about leadership, I wouldn't have picked on, like, hey, picked up on George is not himself today. Let me check on him. And those are the type of things that make junior sailors and even senior sailors feel like you actually care, and then make them actually want to work for you. So those are the type of things that I have done in the 14-year career to try to future-proof, because leadership is something that not only happens in the military, but you have to be able to lead once you transition into the civilian world.
Thanks. Good question. I'll tell you, as an aviator in the Marine Corps, as a young officer, your first, took 4 years to get through flight school, to work through all the different steps and stages and land in an F-18, right? It took 4 years. And I'll tell you, in that 4 years, you're very self-focused in that time frame. Oh, that's a sad one. You're very self-focused in that first 4 years, because you need to perform. You need to learn things you've never learned before, do things you've never done before. So I spent that time. Fortunately, I was married, Kathy Jean was there with me, and I would go through, you had to learn emergency procedures for everything in an F-18, if the engine caught on fire, if you're boarding to take off, you have all these emergency steps. And there were 20 or 30 of these for every airplane. We'd write them on cards, and Kathy Jean and I would do emergency procedures with her. So I guarantee you, Kathy Jean, if you're ever flying in an airplane with her, she knows just what to do if the engine catches on fire. And she could probably start that thing, and she could probably fly it, I bet, after going to that. But I guess what I'm saying is that first 4 or 6 years, very self-focused. And then I got into the fleet. And the fleet is this magical place that everybody tries to go to when you're in training, right? Because that's where it all is. And when I got to the fleet, I was introduced into real fleet Marines. People have been on deployments, had done things, older ones, younger ones like myself. You're still pretty self-focused initially because you're trying to make it there by doing a good job. It's all very uncomfortable, as we discussed earlier. But where I started to, invest in the future for myself, future-proof myself, is when I started to recognize that there were actually hundreds of people there that made that airplane fly every day. I just walked out and got in it and took off, right? And so you don't, as a young person, you don't see that. And you do see some aviators, some officers that go through their whole career and never recognize the hundreds, if not thousands of people that are around them that actually make all these things work. So I think as a young captain, so I'd been promoted a couple times, I'd probably been in 6 years, I started to recognize all these other people that were actually killing themselves day in and day out so that I could go do my job. And if they didn't do their job, I was useless, right? Because a broken airplane, what's the aviator do with that, right? So when I started to recognize the work that other people and the team that I was in and the role that I played in that team, that started to change my path in the Marine Corps. And what I mean by that is all of a sudden there were opportunities that came my way that I was able to take advantage of that were like stepping stones to, I wanted to be, at some point, the commanding officer of a fighter squadron. That was a goal for me. Well, that recognition of others puts me on a path, because where I would have fallen off that path, there was a young enlisted Marine or a senior enlisted Marine that caught me and pulled me right back on the path. And nobody knew it but them and me. And and if I hadn't been cognizant of them or recognized them or saw them, they would have been happy to watch me fall right off that path, right? Yep. So you make your own luck and be good to people, and that's how you do that. So that got me going the right way. As a commanding officer in Miramar, it was I'd been on a base many times, right, in my career. And for most of my career, when I drove through the front gate of an air station, there was 4 things there that I thought the whole base was. There was the flight line, right? There was the front gate. There was the gym, and there was an officers club. And on Friday, the officers club and the gym switched places. right? And for me, that was what a base was. And then when I drove to Miramar for the first time, knowing I was the commanding officer, or going to be the commanding officer at Miramar, when I drove through that gate, it was like I saw 5,000 people I didn't even know were there, because they all made the base work, and my job now was to make the base work, and they all did jobs that I wasn't qualified to do, so I had to rely on them in a major, major way to get the job done. And it just really formed me as a leader, and that's how come I'm on the path that I'm on.
Okay. I thought I was going to say something unique, but clearly I'm not. So I agree with both of these two gentlemen up here. I think the first time that, even though when we come into the military, it's very team focused, right? Whether you go through boot camp, whether you go through other accession, officer accessions, you know, were you ROTC or were you? Oh, CS, perfect, right? And a lot of team building that happens there. But I think for a lot of us, we're too immature or young to really see and really understand the gravity of what that means. The first time that I think I started to kind of get out of myself and my line of thinking really didn't happen on my first ship. I was on that first ship, and you know, it was great. You know, September 11th happened. We sailed. We did Enduring Freedom. We had long deployments. And it wasn't until I came to shore duty, where I was recruiting young men and women to join the Navy, that I actually started to think about, you know, where do I fit into the larger military? Where do these people that I'm asking to join the military, what does that look like? And then I remember my chief at the time, I was still enlisted, and I was moving up the enlisted ranks looking to make chief one day. And my chief sat down and talked to me, and he said, "You're not ready to make chief," which is a big deal in the Navy side of the house. That goes from E6 to E7. You wear a different uniform, you have a different role, and you're in the senior ranks of the non-commissioned officers. And he told me that until you write your evaluation, which is your kind of like, you know, what you've done for the year or whatever, when you're writing about yourself, he said, if your evaluation is about yourself, you're not ready to be a chief. Your evaluation should be about all the things that the people that worked with you did. And I took that on, and as I moved up in the leadership ranks of the military, I started to remember that. I always teach my junior officers and whatnot, if you're writing about yourself, that's great, you're a great technician, right? But what you do as a leader should always be about the people and how you grew those people without you being there, right? If you are writing about yourself, you've missed the boat. So that's when I first started thinking about future-proofing. And I think we're gonna talk about leadership throughout this discussion, and I think that that's a big piece of what that is. So do we have any questions? I have some free ones here, but I would like to get out about if people have questions. So just raise your hand as we're talking, and I'll get out there and get some questions answered. Nobody yet? All right, yeah? Coming? Almost? Okay, we got one back here, all right. Because if not, I've got plenty.
Thank the three of you again for being willing to talk to us today. I have zero military experience. I have very little military knowledge, but having pastored now in San Diego, and Oscar knows this, transitioned here from Dothan, Alabama, I'm constantly in contexts where military personnel are active and transitioning. Is there a resource that you can give to the average person or civilian if they are in community with a military personnel and they're looking for options and to kind of plan their future after the military? Any resources you can give us to point them to?
So there are a lot of resources for those that are making their new life after the military as they're getting out, right? And for the ones that are in. So there's a huge nonprofit network in San Diego and in most places that is very focused on military in varying different ways, whether it be Navy Marine Corps Relief, Support the Enlisted Project, Father Joe's, all these other groups, USO, Armed Forces Y, all these groups that can do that. But there are also very focused ones that are focused on transition out as people get out of the military and how they can make that happen for themselves. So I think the answer to your question is there's probably more resources available for these service members and their families getting out than anyone could imagine. The challenge is to understand that they're there and how to put them to work for you. So the military does not a great job, but a pretty good job of understanding what some of those are. But the community, and I'll use San Diego as an example because I'm on a couple of nonprofit boards that are military focused. If you plug into any of these nonprofits and tell them what it is you're looking for, what your needs are, they are very good about plugging you into the right nonprofit to get you going the direction that you need to go. So I think it comes down to this community idea, whether it be through a church or through nonprofits, through friends, through people got out in front of. There's lots of opportunity to get people through the door, but it also matters in groups like this where you see people like you're saying that might be struggling or might be having something coming up, or you're picking up on them, they're not quite the same, or there's something different. Just ask them a couple of questions, right? And you get a couple of answers, and if you know them, you can figure out, hey, they're, maybe they need a little help, and it's not hard to get to that next step. And there's a whole organization or group of organizations that will swoop them up and take care of it. So, do you have anything to add to that? Oh, I turned it up.
Yeah, it's okay.
That's all right.
I would say if they're still in, I would tell them to definitely seek out the Skill Bridge program. The military offers this program when you're getting ready to transition back into the civilian lifestyle. It's a thing called Skill Bridge. It's a few administrative things that you have to do before you start, but I went on the Skill Bridge website. I might have been Wednesday, just because I like to check it randomly. And it's like 134 pages of different companies that you can skill bridge with. And basically the skill bridge program allows you to learn, like one of them is Google. They have the Google University where you can go there for 13 weeks. In these 13 weeks, you're still being paid as an active duty military member. In these 13 weeks, and because it's a government contract with these companies, there's a certain percentage of everybody that participates in this that they have to hire. So I would say Skill Bridge, depending on the community. And when I say community, the Navy kind of breaks up into, like, you have your aviation community, you have your surface community, your submariner community, you have your special warfare community. Each community has specialized places that these nonprofits work specifically with that community. I work currently with the special warfare community, so they have the Navy SEAL Foundation. And for people who are retiring out from that community, the Navy SEAL Foundation offers fellowship programs, they offer internships and all of that for people that are retiring. But as JP said, we do a good job at letting people know, not a great job.
I also salute all of you and thank you for what you're doing and have done. And my question is for those that enter into the military and they may not necessarily have focus when they go in. And as all of you have kind of shared already, that there's less focused people and a lot of work. And so sometimes you have this collision between people who are just in the military and those that want to really have a focus towards something. How would you support a person that wants to have the focus, but they're surrounded in their task or their job function around people that really don't care and they're just there because it's a paycheck or something of that nature? How do you really encourage them outside of finding a mentor, but help them stay motivated to really find success for that path forward in their job function?
Well, I'll say in my personal experience, I do think at the end of the day, everybody who joins the military, we are still an all-volunteer force as of right now. So everybody who joined for some reason, right? Even if that reason was just to get away or they didn't have anything else to do, they made a choice. So a lot of times what we try to do is we try to, through mentorship or through communication with those sailors or Marines or airmen or Army personnel, is try to get back to what was the why. And they used to teach us that as recruiters. Like there's a personal reason why you chose this, right? Because you chose it. Right, and a lot of people do it, not under duress. It's a choice. right? So, and a lot of them, they do have some deep desire for something, whether it's service, whether it's to make their families proud, whether it's to make their communities proud. They have this desire to do something different. And you're right. Sometimes when you, especially in the very beginning, if they're not mentored very early on or whatnot, you can lose a little bit of that because you get shuffled in sometimes. You go to this big command and you kind of lose yourself. You travel somewhere where you don't know anybody, and so you kind of lose connection with what was that thing. So I think as leadership, it's very imperative that you try to connect with that person on a personal level and find out what was your reason for doing that. And I'm going to plug this in right here since we're all in church right now. I think that fosters right in the ministry as well, right? People are making choices for reasons. And it's up to us to get to that personal reason with people, because when we are focused on the mission or the bigger or the larger things, we lose that personal touch with people. It's easy for people to kind of get lost about, why am I doing this thing or what is the value of it. So it connects with them personally. If we can connect to that, usually you'll see some progress. And that's something we do with midterm evaluations and mentorship sessions and whatnot. So that would be my thought.
Yeah, I'll pick up on exactly that. So typically in the military, at least my experience, you do have very good leaders. Now there are some that are not very good leaders, right? That is, but it's very small actually. And what you find out is, say you have a young Marine or a sailor and they have a section of Marines or sailors that are working for them, it is their responsibility to know not just about their young sailor Marines' work habits at work, but they know their families, they know where they live, they know if they see them come to work in a nice car, they want to know. They'll tell them how nice that car is, and they want to know how much did it cost and how did you pay for it. They really get into their lives in a way that you could never do in a civilian role. In fact, when I got out of the military, my first HR lady was talking to me about this, and I told her some of the things I did. She said, "Please don't do that here." Right? I said, "I won't. I promise I won't." But you really get into the lives of your Marines and your sailors, and the reason you do that, the selfish reason is there's a job that's got to be done, your section has to perform, and so you get it done that way. The other piece of it is most leaders truly care for the people that work for them, truly care for them and their families. And the reason they do that is because if their family's unhappy, service member's unhappy. An unhappy service member doesn't do their job. So they do have kind of this built-in support network within the organization itself. Now sometimes that fails, right, and the leader isn't great, but the way the military is built is, if your leader is not doing the job, and it's a hard step to take, but the machine will accept it, have the courage to go above that leader and say something to that person's boss. Now that is a big step in a young person's life to make a decision like that. Now I'll also say that leadership in the military has evolved. When I joined in late 80s, early 90s, it was pretty much, we didn't ask a lot of questions. They told us what we were doing. The mission's got to get done, and we just went and did it. By the time I retired, I would lay out what's going to happen, and I would have these very young Marines, raise their hand. I'd call them, and they'd say, "Why are we doing that?" And I remember thinking, I don't think I'd ever ask why, but now they ask why. They all ask why, right? And it goes back to the why. Not only why are they there, but why are they doing what they're doing? So as leadership is concerned, you owe them that answer, because when you tell them why they're doing it, most of them process it in their way, and they go, "Oh, makes sense. I don't want to do it. This is going to be hard, but I know why we're doing it. We'll get it done." So that's kind of the leadership you got. But if there's somebody that in particular that's starting to waver a little, because there are some that they get in for their 4 years and then they get out and they really don't care, or they get in trouble and then their motivation falls off. If you get hung up in that crowd, or if you know somebody that's like that, then I think that's what people like us are for. We can help that person, be happy to talk to them about what's going on in your life, what's going on in your career, what are the next steps, and keep them motivated. But there are a lot of people in their chain of command and around them that can show them the path every single day they see it, and if they want to get on it, they'll do it. And if you do a job, and his bio is an excellent example of that, they're going to make you sailor of the quarter, they're going to promote you early, and they're going to do that because they recognize your effort and your motivation. They're going to want to maintain that because they need you to grow and get better and better and better. So the machine kind of makes that happen. Does that help? Does that answer the question?
I can't add anything. I can't add one single thing at all. Especially, you're looking at two, as the enlisted people say, people from the dark side. They get to see it from a more whole picture standpoint, because from an enlisted level, as a work center suit being a first class petty officer, if I have someone that can't focus, I have one or two, maybe three options. I mean, My least favorite option is to put it on paper. My favorite option is to pull them to the side and figure out kind of what both of these gentlemen hinted at, seeing what's actually going on with them. Because as a sailor in Diego Garcia, who before leaving to go to Diego Garcia, had traveled outside of the state of Alabama one time, as far as being long term. So I definitely, on that 37.2-mile island, hit a wall within my 13 months of being there. And that is, like they were saying, that is when the mentors and the leaders have to step in, because I went from a 32,000 population hometown to an island that had about 2,200. And it was like Bill Murray, Groundhog's Day, just the same thing over and over and over and over. So I kind of started losing focus. I started doing other things that wasn't, one, productive for myself, but wasn't conducive to or contributing to the mission. I had people step in and ask me what's going on. And I told them I was homesick. Why don't you go home? I don't have the leave. So what they ended up starting, and leave is vacation time or PTO for the civilian world. I didn't have the leave days. That's right, you let them know. I didn't have the leave days, and I had someone, they instantly would come every weekend to prevent me from going to this place called the Brit Club every weekend. They would take me to the gym, we'd play basketball, we'd play soccer, we'd do different things, because sometimes you just need something to break up the monotony of the Groundhog Day. So I would say you have to have that interpersonal thing going with every person that you work with or for.
And if I can just throw one last thing on that, I will say, and I'm sure you guys all have plenty of stories, a lot of that behavior that you notice with those personnel is because, once again, people just are not paying attention to them in some kind of way. I don't know how many negative sailors or Marines or whatever we've probably all seen that you just start focusing on them a little bit more, giving them a thank you, giving them something, and they become your best worker, your number one guy or gal, right? Like, to this day, one of some of my worst sailors, I guess, and whatever in hindsight, they're still reaching out to me now that I'm retired. Some of them travel to come to my retirement. Some of them, are still messaging me, oh, thank you for this thing, when you noticed me, when you saw me, when you did this thing, what you said to me, which I wasn't even thinking of. I just went by and said thank you for something. Like, that really made a difference to the way I was feeling that day. So you really never know the impact you have on people. And so I think that's imperative for all of us, once again, as ministers as well, to think about when we're interacting with people, how that impact can have or hold weight for that person wherever they are in their lives. All right, questions? Yeah, let's go.
Greetings and salutations to everyone. Happy Sabbath. I couldn't help myself. I want to tie in mental health. And he just said something that made me think more of it, being seen, being heard. Often in the military it's very difficult because the mission's first, right? So from each of you, what were your best practices in addition to prayer life and things like that? What were your biggest, best practices that guided you along the way? Because you were in how many years? 25? Okay, so I would love to hear that.
You're gonna pull stories out. Okay, I love it. You guys want to take that first? Or? I can jump when I get the mic. Okay, so best practices to how I had to do it, or what we did for others? So I wasn't always the best, I'll be honest. And I'm very blessed and fortunate that, as an officer on the dark side, I had great chiefs and senior chiefs that worked with me. And those are, like I said, mid-level managers in the Navy, but outside, unlike the business world, like JP was alluding to, they are able to be a little more intrusive, and they pay attention to our sailors and our Marines. And so sometimes when you have that person who's struggling, you go find the chief, and you're like, hey, I need you to go tune into him. One of the things I learned, and a lot of people would probably think that when they see me, because I generally have a smile on my face, but attitude is so important. I had a bosun's mate chief, who's now a senior chief, I love this guy to death, And I don't care what was going on the ship. He always would come, he would come into my office, get me off my computer, he'd be like, get off your computer, sir, let's go outside and see the guys. And he would clap me, he'd grab me, he'd take me out of whatever I was doing, whatever I was focused on, to get out there with the team, spend some time, whether it was we pulled in somewhere and he got everybody together and we all had a little mini group potluck on the pier, whatever it was, he was bringing the team together and he was 100% focused on our people. So I learned a lot from him. I watched him a lot because even though I was the guy in charge, sometimes I would get like really, and he'd pull me to the side and say, what's going on? Let's talk about it. So I think, and that's a hard thing to navigate. I think I'm learning and I'm really curious to learn from the civilian side how we do that when we get out of the military, because it's kind of assumed that we can just do that. We can just walk up to somebody and be like, how you doing? And what's going on? And that may not work so well, you know, on the other side of the house, right? I would assume we could do that safely here in church, hopefully. But you know, you never know. But I think it's good to do that. Just sometimes, just grabbing someone and doing that, it'll pay a lot of dividends.
I would say the instance when it was for me was, so I was stationed at NOSC, which is called Naval Operational Support Center, now known as Navy Reserve Center, Los Angeles. It was 2014, I was going to school, and we have leadership that's known as the triad. The triad consists of the commanding officer, the executive officer, and what they call a command master chief. So at the time he was a command senior chief. We had a command softball team that was going to play a game, and I had a homework that I was trying to do. And being a young sailor, I think I had only been in 2.5 years, so I didn't quite understand that what he said, he couldn't really do. So he was like, hey, either you play or your eval will reflect. And I was like, oh, trying to get my money, so I need an eval so I can take the test XYZ. So I go out there against my gut feeling, and that very time I go out there, I tear my ankle to pieces. That was in July, it was a week before my 26th birthday. I tear my ankle to pieces, and I spend my birthday in the operating room. There are a couple difficulties. The command, the same Master Chief, XO, CO, that told me I had to play, didn't come to see me, didn't come to visit me. No one from the command came to see me. My mother had to come from Alabama with me during my surgery, all those good things. So that happened in July. I actually didn't walk again until December of that year. And so I went back to work in January, very, very bitter. And in the Navy, we had this thing called a 1306. And it's a special request to basically terminate shore duty to go to sea duty. So I requested to do a 1306. I got it signed. I was communicating with my detailer, what the Marines call a monitor, career monitor. I was communicating with my detailer, and at that point I was done with the Navy. I had done 2 years. I was like, look, let me just finish my 2 years at a squadron in Louisiana. It's 5 hours from home. I can transition out really easy, save the Navy some money. It was going that way for a while, and the same command, now Master Chief, intervened and got my orders canceled, and he got me sent to 29 Palms. Now, this is how, you know, when you don't know that you have God's favor, but God is favoring you. I was like, 29 Palms, I never even heard of this. So they were joking, it was like, you ever seen the movie The Hills Have Eyes? It was filmed out there, and I was like, what? So I was still a little disgruntled, like, man, you hopped in and this is the change that we made. So I'm really angry, really disgruntled. So I'm talking to my family back home, and I talk to my uncle, who's a Vietnam veteran. I tell him, man, Uncle Pepper, I got orders. I was trying to come to New Orleans, but they sent me to 29 Palms, and I'm going to 7th Marine Regiment. He said, say what? I said, yeah, I'm going to 7th Marine Regiment. He was like, man, that's where I deployed for Vietnam. I was in 1-7. So now, because that's my uncle, he helped raise me, now I have a little bit more pride. Okay, well, they thought this was gonna break me, I'm gonna make me. So September 2015, I get to 29 pounds, and I'm a terrible sailor at this point. I'm miserable. I'm trying to shake it, but I'm not. My uniform jacked up, and I get talked to as I check in. Like, your neckerchief is bad, your dress whites are bad, whatever. So I was like, oh, here we go. It's another loop. I'm just finna get in trouble for 3 years. But this command, I had a HMC, Kiel Basawan. He took me under his wing. He told me, hey, your chief's mess from your last command did you no favor. They want you to come here and fail. We had a conversation. You don't have to fall in that loop. He talked to me like most people in the Navy hadn't talked to me. He talked to me as a 25-year-old man versus a 18-year-old kid. So when he gave me my options, I hit the ground running. It took a while at 29 pounds to get computer access, so I couldn't do my job. It took like 4 months. So in those 4 months, you heard JP say I became Fleet Marine Force qualified. So within that, you have to do the Marine Corps PFT, you have to do a 3-mile run, you have to do pull-ups, and you have to do crunches. So that's part of it. You have to do a ruck march, which is the march you see on TV where they have that big pack on their back, 70 pounds with the rifle. You had to do a gas chamber, all these different things. But in my mind, I'm like, this is what my uncle did going to Vietnam. So now I feel like I'm living my uncle, trying to make him proud. Eventually, all that happens, long story longer, I get my FMF pin, and I do a lot of the things that the chief told me I needed to do to be successful. And our eval cycle comes around. I was an E5. Evals are new in March at that time. I had only been on board for like 8 months, I think. September to March, however many months that is. I have my warfare qualification. I'm taking charge of my programs. I've created an association that didn't exist. And our evals, they go in 3 levels. The top is the early promote. The second level is must promote. And then the worst, technically, is a promotable. My first eval, promotable. So I'm angry again. But this same chief was like, look, you're thinking small. And he basically broke down and showed me the bigger picture of things. That's when I learned that you have to show career progression. So if they would have given me an EP or an MP, I would have had to continuously do more and more and more and more to remain, while someone could have knocked me off and not have done as much at the top. So that's a long way of just saying, when you're having those issues, sometimes it's best to think about the bigger picture, because we're all just cogs in a big machine in the end of the day. And just hopefully you get lucky and you have 1 or 2 people that take a liking to you and they guide you in the right path.
So that actually was a very good story. And as a military leader, I was embarrassed by some of the things I heard, right, that you dealt with. And then I was got a lot of pride out of some of those things. And it really shows the question you had about leadership in the military, how there's this, there's somebody there who's going to touch you in the right way and pick you up. And that's what he got at 29 palms. So I think there's that background. The thing for me, I learned a long time ago, although I talk too much, is actually listen, right? So somebody sat down and listened to him for a minute and then talked to him like the man that he is. And it turns out he's got a brain in his head and he can make decisions. He just needs to know what's going on.
Yep.
So this fella, this command master chief, told him that. And he figured it all out. And then the tools are there. And you can make it happen. So you can turn somebody around in a heartbeat if you approach them the right way. But it all starts with just listen to them for a minute. And it's not unexpected that younger people in the military or in life have a little picture, a little view. They don't see very far because they can't. But then somebody opens their eyes for just a minute, and even if you see that snapshot for just a second, you know there's a bigger horizon out there, and you know that you're part of something bigger. And then you tie in the family piece, and then you're over the top, right? I mean, just makes it happen. So that was a good question. That was an amazing story, and I love the way it tied into everything we've talked about so far this morning. That was really good.
Okay, I have a question. What are some things that have changed over time with respect to career progression within the military that you have observed?
So that's a good question. Like I said, I talked about how the people change a little bit, whereas in my day, you would never ask why, you would just get the job done and make it work. I think the people have changed, there's a lot more why. Leadership has changed as a result of that. They're not only willing to describe the why, they often lead with the why. Hey, this is what we're here today for, this is what we're doing, this is why we're getting it done. And I think, I don't know if it's more contemporary leadership recognizes the value of empowering people with the knowledge of what it is they're doing and why they're doing it. And so I think that's super important. But I think, you know, it's like the military, the mission, the leadership behind it, the accountability, the expectations of performance, at least since the all-volunteer force post-Vietnam, and I would say even in the years prior to that, in World War II, World War I, that is a very consistent thing. The way the military functions and works, the expectations and who gets what done and how it happens has changed. I think the approach has changed a little bit, especially since the all-volunteer force. And I'll throw out some numbers here that'll make you cringe, I hope, is that of all the kids graduating that leave high school in the United States, only 25% are even eligible, capable of joining the military anymore. And that's because of criminal background, drugs, physical fitness, and education. They fail somewhere on one of those four things. And then of the people that join the military and our population, so today, active duty and reserve, all this, you hear about the U.S. military and the strength behind it, is 0.75% of our population. That constitutes our military. 0.75%, and they come from a population that is reduced by 75% coming out of high school, which is a tragedy, right? So our society has changed greatly, but the military is driven by a mission that is unyielding, right? The mission requires, we don't set the requirement for the mission. Our adversary sets that requirement. We have to meet that requirement. And the other thing I'll say about those who join the military, we don't make a pledge to a person or even the country, actually. We make it to the Constitution, to an idea of what America should be, that Constitution. That's what we say our oath to when we first join and as we get promoted. So the people that come in that are tied with that ideology to this idea and not to a president, a state, the nation, anything in particular, it's to an idea, drives us today like I think it's driven us for 250 years. So I don't think that part of it has changed, but the way we engage with our people, the way we educate them, our expectations has changed.
I think for me, what I've seen, so in 2011 in the Navy, I know most of us have heard the term drink like a sailor. So in 2011 when I joined, the chief's mess, the running joke for the E6 and below was to make chief, you had to have 2 DUIs, an NJP, and a divorce. Like you had to have those things to make chief. Nowadays, in 2025, if you have any, outside of like the divorce thing, of course, because that still happens. But outside of, if you have a DUI, it's hard to bounce back and progress nowadays when you have a DUI or even what they call an alcohol-related incident, ARI. If you have those things in your record, you're not as easily promoting into those senior ranks anymore. If you have NJPs, which I'm sorry, I keep giving it non-judicial punishment. Non-judicial punishment in the military is if Colonel JP, if I went up to him and they said, this is what Petty Officer Rogers did, even if I had proof or if they didn't have proof, if he read what they put in his face in front of him and he was like guilty, then he had the authorities to say half month's pay times 2, which is 2 months of getting paid half of what you get, and then reduction in rank. So if I'm an E6, he could say, we're gonna knock him back down to E5, and then at that E5 pay level, we're gonna pay him essentially once a month for 2 months. So with all that, you needed that type of stuff in 2011, 2012, 2013 to quote unquote make it to the chief rank. Nowadays, if you have any of that, you're never going to make it to the chief rank. So That's the change in the promotion and the progression. I mean, we're becoming a more professional organization versus the roughshod organization we used to be considered. So that's what I've seen. Oh, that's why we've become more professional, is because we've had less people. When you have to do, and this is going to be to, like, the Marine Corps is one of my favorite organizations because out of all the branches, the Marine Corps has the smallest budget. In the past 6 years, they've been the only branch to pass an audit every year. They do the most with the least. The only issue I've ever had with the Marine Corps is the quality of life. That's it. And they're not, they just want you to get the job done.
Good afternoon. I am an Air Force veteran, but I worked on Miramar, and I was a military and family life counselor. And piggybacking off of her question, for leadership and for somebody that's still in, how do you make the connection between getting help? Because like you all mentioned, there's all kinds of things that happen in their personal lives that affect their active duty. And a lot of times I found, this is my own little anecdotal evidence, but it seems that Navy and Marines are more afraid to disclose to anyone any of their problems because they're afraid of the rain, or making rain. So you have the wonderful program of military and family life counselors. Now I know they have a negative connotation in a lot of areas, but a lot of them are very good, but they're not utilized. So from a leadership standpoint, how do you make the connection to getting the soldiers the help that they need without them making them feel like they're going to be penalized?
Yeah, I can start with that. So, and I know you're going to come back to it as a former commanding officer as well. I think there's a couple things. I think when you talk about mental health as a whole, there are stigmas in our society as a whole around mental health, right? I honestly think that's one of the least understood pieces of health that exists in society, right? To include myself. So I think you had that to start off with, right? There's a lot of connotations up and down about that. And then as a culture, I do think in the military, there is still somewhat of a culture of, if you can't make it for whatever reason, something's wrong with you, right? And if we're just being 100% honest now, PTSD is something that is very, very poorly studied, right? Like we don't know the effects of what things have on people. We're starting to learn about people's trauma from their childhoods and how that affects them when they're in their 80s, right? So I think there's so much around that we're still working at, but I will tell you 100% that it is a culture that is being promoted to change, right? Like every commanding officer, I think, is tracking that we need to move in that direction. And so we try our best as leadership on down, all the way down, we would say, to the deck plates, to make sure that sailors, Marines, airmen, and Army personnel know that when you need help, it's not because something's wrong with you. It's because as human beings, we need help, right? That's something that and to be honest, in the military, we are asked to do things that, like I said, most of you guys would look at and say, oh my God, I can't imagine doing things of that nature, right? And so what those effects have on people, we're still discovering. So it's imperative that everybody in the community as a command makes that something that is okay to talk about and okay to deal with and have. And that kind of can be individual with a command or within a command. But we even have things to speak on, like a DEOC survey, for instance, where all commands once a year, they kind of look at the climate of the command, the culture. And we have things that are in place to kind of look at that and see how are things happening. Have you guys had an increase in these things, a decrease, and why and how and all those things. So there's a lot of things in place, but I think it still comes down to a culture. And I will say what I have seen in my 26 years or 25 years or whatever, and I'm sure these two gentlemen can attest to that, is the culture is shifting more to an understanding of acceptance and an understanding of, that is what people deal with, right?
Yeah, so I'll jump on that as well. We talked about culture, and you saw it too. So there's different command teams at different levels. Some are really good and really connected with their people, and in that time, in that space, you might get somebody that'll step up and say, hey, I'm having a financial problem, I'm having a this, I'm having a that. And then other command teams are actually very good as well, but they're not as dialed in. And some command teams are not good, right? They're just not focused the right way. So what I will say is, Marines and sailors in particular, I'm sure Army, Air Force, my dad was Air Force, so I know, but you join the service, you want to be deployable, you want to deploy, you want to go forward, you want to go do the job, and you are afraid to say, I'm having a problem, because you might lose that deployment, you might not get to go, and you're afraid to say it, right? So as a commander, I'll say, well, just, it's okay, put it out, let us know, we'll fix it, that was my message. At the same time, I had to get a flight physical every year to keep flying. And do you think I told that doctor anything that was ever wrong with me? Not once, right? If you look at my medical record for 26 years, I should be alive 1,000 years from now, right? I mean, it was amazing how good it was. And then when I was retiring, I had a flight physical like a month before I was getting out. And I told the doctor, sit down, get your pencil out. And I just laid out everything that I thought might be wrong with me. He goes, man, I don't think you should be flying. I go, I know, exactly, right? That's why I didn't tell you that. So, but they do things like they put in the Marine and Family Life counselors, right? They'll put in layers, they put in these options. So one of the groups that nonprofits I'm with, and we talked about nonprofits earlier, was Support the Enlisted Project. And I don't know if you're familiar with them, they're right outside of Miramar. They're focused E6 and below financial stuff. So there are groups out there where service members can go directly to, their command can refer them, or they can go on their own, and those nonprofits aren't going to call their command and say, hey, so-and-so walked through my door today and they got financial problems. They're going to address those problems. Those organizations like Support the Enlisted Project and others are actually accredited by DoD, and it becomes part of the network of support that exists for service members who may or may not want to bring forward their problem to their command, and they can get it addressed. Because I will tell you, at the end of the day, every commander is only worried about one thing, and that is readiness. Can my unit do the job it's supposed to do? Meaning, can my people do it? Can I do it? Machines? Does all that work? And so these, a smart commander will create an environment where somebody who has a problem or something that could be a problem will bring it up so we can fix it, because you can fix just about everything, right? Or plug into these networks that are out there to support Marines and sailors that maybe don't want to raise their hand and say I have a problem, but yet they can still go get the help. It's complicated, and anything with people is complicated, right? I mean, you saw that in that MFLC role that you had. You saw that, how difficult it can be. Some people are very easy and very open, others are very closed. Some are paranoid, some are not, and there's a lot going on. And then put a family in the midst of that, bring a spouse into that picture, and yep.
When they come to the knowledge of, okay, there's a service available, and then that's where it stops. Okay, I'll go see you, I'm that one person, but what about the advertisement? Because there again, people have a negative connotation towards it, but if the leadership is more apt to say, okay, the military family life counselor is not going to record one thing you say, unless you say 100%.
Right.
But that doesn't mean anything to them.
Right.
They're like, no, we're going to tell.
Yeah.
So until it becomes real to them, it's like, okay, yes, I went to see them. We did. Okay. But otherwise, it still looks like there's a disconnect. There's a top and there's a bottom.
Yeah.
And when I'm talking about suicide, it comes up a lot for MFLCs, right? So, it's this balance, I guess, is what I'm looking at. It's like there seems to be, especially, and like I said, it's only my little anecdotal evidence. The Navy and Marine Corps suffer so much because they don't tell anyone in all of those long deployments and those family pieces. And you're just two people, right? Three people, so it comes from the top. But it was just interesting to hear you all and the way you guys shared. I really appreciate how you looked at it. I'm sure you guys were great in your commands too.
We did our best, right?
I did want to say one thing. When it comes to that, as George said, it is a major shift that's starting to happen in the military in its entirety. But I can say I know it to be a thing because, one, I have a therapist and I haven't been ridiculed, but I'm also, excuse my language, a big black man. So it's a little bit harder to ridicule me. But in the special warfare community, which these are what we call the pipe hitters. They're downrange and they're doing the nasty work, some of the stuff you actually see on television. I think George and I spoke a few months about human performance factors. They have these things called human performance factors, and they have councils within each command. And periodically, every so often, we get an email saying it's time to update your human factor. And it does speak to the idea of like people wanting to hide things, but a lot of times it gets snuffed out in the council. Like you can put XYZ on the paper, and as a person who had to do it and I got snuffed out on something, it's a way, I don't know how they do it, but they're able to snuff it out. They have a scientific manner in which these numbers don't add up, and they'll bring you in and start asking you those questions. And the reason I'm sure that the climate towards that is changing is, like I said, spec war, the people that are actually fighting like downrange are taking these things into consideration. And I think the Navy and Marine Corps as a whole is starting to realize that the most important weapon system is the human weapon system. So I think that is slowly starting to change. As I'm seeing junior new people come in, and some of it is disrespectful, but it's still very like assertive. Like, this is what I need, and you're going to give it to me. Which somebody who's 14 years in, like, these junior sailors are different. But you have to still appreciate it to a certain degree because they're gonna get what they need.
Oh,
So I wanted to ask, what is the one or two things that you wished civilians knew about what you do? I'm married to him.
The one or two things that I wish civilians.
I'm going to tell you my thing. This one bothers me to no end. When people walk up to well, there's two of them. People walk up to military and they say, "Oh, thank you for your service, soldier." Right? I'm not a soldier. I'm a sailor. It's similar to like I go up to you and say, "Hey, thank you, so and so," and I don't know your name. Right? So a personalization about what people do, I think, is important. And the other one, this is like a light pet peeve. It's not big, but and I get, we look at military as a whole and we look at civilians as a whole. Those are two large factions of people, but they assume that everybody in the military knows everybody in the military. They're like, "Oh, I know somebody in the military." I'm like, that's great. What branch were they in? You should know them, right? Maybe. I don't know. Can you tell me something about them? So what I think people can do, and this is no, I'm not, talking about anybody in particular. My own mother still called me a soldier, years into my career. But what I would say is it's part of, things like this. I think where people show appreciation and they show up and, it matters, it's a little bit important. That's something that I think for me personally makes us feel better. So I don't know, I'll let these two gentlemen talk about that, but that was just a light pet peeve. So if you can learn a little personalization, I think that goes a long way.
For me, one of the two things that I wish every civilian would understand is, one, the difference between Veterans Day and Memorial Day. Veterans are for people like myself, JP. Yeah, we're all still here as a Veteran Day. Memorial Day is for those who gave the ultimate sacrifice, who laid it all out on the line, that you may be experiencing some of the freedoms that you experience right now. This day is to memorialize them. So this weekend being Memorial Day weekend, I wanted to make sure that is one of his pet peeves. That's one of my biggest pet peeves. I tell my friends, I think they do it now to mess with me, but they literally will text me, "Happy Memorial Day, cuz." Like, bro, I'm still alive. I am still alive. The second thing is, and it's kind of the same as what George was saying, we're not all the same. You see a Marine, a sailor, a soldier, and an airman, we literally are doing separate things. It's one of those things where you don't let the right hand know what the left hand is doing. We are in the same organization as in DOD, but we're doing completely Marine Corps, amphibious assault is their specialty. Navy, waterways, we make sure that the waterways remain open for free trade. We maintain superiority. Army, bullet sponges. No, but no, that's the ground element. Like they were first. The Army is first. The Navy is second, but the Marine Corps just been alive. But they stayed consistent a little bit longer than we did. But we were first. We're the oldest. They just the oldest active Marine Corps. But I'm joking, but we all support the Constitution. We all fight to make sure that America and democracy can survive, but we do it all in a different way. Just because you see all of us in a uniform, even George, I've never been on a ship. He's been ship bound his whole career. I don't know anything about a ship, but he probably couldn't tell you how does a special purpose MAGTF break down, you know? So so that is what I would say to you.
So I can tell you about a ship is they start rusting right away. You spend your whole day painting that thing over and over again. So for a while, it seemed like everybody thought that anybody got out of the military was alcoholic, womanizer, had PTSD. And so they were afraid to hire him because they figured they'd just come to work and blow the whole place up. Well, that's another story. So, but it's not that way, right? It's not the way we are, right? Now, there are people who do have those problems, but we're certainly not that way. And then the other thing that I like people to know is I did not go to work every day. George didn't do it, and Oscar didn't do it. We don't go to work every day and just tell, when I was at Miramar, I didn't go to work and tell 5,000 people, okay, this is what you're doing today, go do it. I didn't do that, right? What I told everybody was, hey, this is what needs to get done, and how are we going to get this done? And then they told me how it was going to happen, right? So it wasn't this voice of me to everybody else, and then things got done. Now, I will tell you, you can tell a Marine Corps Lance Corporal what to do. And that Lance Corporal will do exactly what you told him to do with such friction that you will fail, right? And he'll look at you with a smile because he did what you told him to do, but not what he wanted to do, right? So it's all about telling him what and the whys and all that. So that translates into the civilian world. When I first met Esther and got the Receptos, I did not run around like George Patton in that place telling everybody what to do and painting stuff and picking this up and putting that down. I didn't do any of that. It was all about listening, hearing, what do we need to do? How do you want to do this? That's a good idea. Why don't you get it done? That leadership that exists in the military is exactly the same. There isn't military leadership and civilian leadership. We're just okay, and you fit.
My next question is, well, what I'm hearing, it feels like you guys should really take this show on the road because it's valuable information for communities and groups so that the things that people really don't know or civilians that know people in the military can point people to other resources. But my question is, hearing those statistics about the readiness of an individual even entering the military, it sounds like there's still room for great opportunity in the military. So would you agree that there's still great levels of opportunity?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, the military is still a top 500 organization, like anything else. I would argue that the standards that our personnel are held to, when you directly translate that to civilian sector, it doesn't generally translate, but if it does, you have somebody that after 3 months of training, right, is put on a multi-million-dollar system and expected to operate that system, right? Expected to learn the things. I mean, I joined the military, to be honest, like somebody else said here, because I didn't want to go to school. I studied harder than I'd ever studied in my life when I was in nuclear engineering school. My buddies were in college partying, right? So I think a lot of times there's a lot of connotations about, and a lot of it is based on, just people just don't know what we actually do. When people get a chance, and I would encourage everybody here, if you do get the opportunity, we happen to live in a very, military town, so you have the opportunity to visit ships, you have the opportunity to go on tours, go and ask and see what some of the people in your community actually do. You would probably be quite surprised at some of the things that are happening. So to directly translate, I mean, he can talk to you about his story. I mean, I got a chance to get some mentorship from JP and how he came directly out of a 26-year military career directly into a, COO effectively position, right? Where they wanted him to come change the culture and lead and develop the personnel in that culture, right? Based on his military experience that had been observed for the last couple of years while he was serving. So I think it exists. It's just not very well known. My own personal experience, and I don't know how well this translates to others, but my parents' generation, for instance, when I joined, there was the shadow of Vietnam and what that was, and that wasn't necessarily the most positive experience for a lot of people, right? So there was this connotation that, hey, you're going to join the military, you're going to go get shipped out, you're going to go die, and also the way people are treated in the military, right? I mean, the experiences of people who were raised in the 70s and the 60s and whatnot, it wasn't the best place for integration, right? But that was the entire country as a whole, right? So a lot has changed in 30, 40, 50 years, right? And so I would just encourage people to really kind of try your best to find out a little bit about it. You'd probably be quite surprised what a lot of people do.
My only thing is, people have asked me about joining the military. This has been and I don't sugarcoat it. I know we need people, but I don't sugarcoat it. I said, if you don't want to be challenged, you shouldn't join. Because 8 weeks in Great Lakes and then 3 weeks in Mississippi to learn my job, and then a week later being shipped to an island that if we had a globe, you could not find it, to take care of pay, life insurance, ID cards, housing allowance, all these different things for roughly about 24,000 people. And you only have pretty much 11 weeks of training. And you're sectioned where you're like PSSN, Rogers, you're over gains and losses. So in gains and losses, when George checks in, if he's coming from San Diego to Diego Garcia, I gotta figure out if he's married, does he have a kid, is he married to a military person. But these are all the things out of 11 weeks of training that I have to, when I see him, it's the first thing I gotta think of. And it's a challenge. Then after I think about what he has going on, now I gotta figure out what paperwork does he need to fill out. Once I figure out the paperwork he feels that, oh, he didn't fill this out right, I gotta track him down, I gotta do X, Y, Z. And if you're not willing to accept the challenge to be, as I was talking to JP earlier, pushed outside of your comfort zone, then don't join. But if you're trying to achieve success, and I brought up the comfort zone thing because one of my mentors told me, success lies right outside of most people's comfort zone. And in order to be continually successful, you have to get comfortable in uncomfortable situations. So that would be what I would say.
And adjacent to that, it's interesting, as most services do it, it's a recruiting tool. The Marine Corps, and I participate in a number of these at Miramar, they do these educator workshops. Have you heard of this? So they go around, they find teachers, high school teachers, that may not really think a whole lot about the military or the Marine Corps. And then when school is out, they take these, they put them in groups, and San Diego gets them a lot, so they'll fly them into Miramar, into San Diego here. They take them into Miramar, the commanding officer of Miramar greets them, talks about what we do, talks about the young Marines, right? So the goal is, just a few weeks ago, they saw some kids graduate from high school, from their schools. They go to a boot camp, right, at MCRD, so 12 weeks later, right, they turn into Marines. So we take them to MCRD, and they watch a graduation. Have you seen an MCRD graduation? You ever been out to one?
Crucible.
Yeah. Parents can't recognize their kids, right? They run out there, first off, all their hair is gone, all that other stuff, but their kids have changed in ways that they didn't know possible, right? So they see that change. So these teachers in these workshops see that immediate change. They recognize that young person because they just had them in class literally 3 months ago. And then we take them out to the flight line at Miramar. So now these same young Marines now, I won't call them kids anymore because they certainly aren't that. We send them off to school from anywhere from 3 weeks to 3 months, or whatever it is, to learn their job, working on an airplane. and now they're on a flight line, and they are solving electrical problems on an F-18, right? And changing out gear and actually doing things that I never knew how to fix. I just knew how to break them. They know how to fix them. They're fixing the radar in an F-18, right? So these educators then go there and they see these people that are 6 months removed from when they last saw them that are doing these incredible, incredible things, right? And I think that, is a big part of, the military and what it does to people and the effect that it can have. And it makes my heart, it actually, you can get afraid for our country sometimes, right? You see all these things on TV, and then I just would go to work, and I would bump into these young people doing these amazing things, and I'd come home to Kathy, I'd say, it's gonna be fine, don't worry about it, because that's who's out there, right? These people that do these things. So the military does things like that, but along the way, those educators, most of them who could have been hardcore anti-military, very much didn't like it, they recognize, because they love those kids, right? Because that's what their job is. And then they recognize what those kids are doing and who they've become and what's gonna, what is out there for them, the possibilities. It's pretty incredible. So.
Awesome. I think we have time for one last question and then we're gonna close. Perfect.
Marco!
I've been waiting. My wife's for my first question. But I have a second one. Have you ever been in a situation where you received orders that gave you a very severe moral dilemma because they were in conflict with whatever your personal beliefs, political beliefs, your strategical beliefs about what the army should be doing at one point or another, and how did you handle that moral problem?
So I don't know that I faced that problem. I will tell you this. When I got all through flight school and my first deployment was to Aviano, Italy, right? So I'm not complaining. Now, back to your quality of life, right? The Marine Corps, we lived in tents next to the runway. The Air Force lived at Piancavalla, which is the ski resort that was 30 minutes away from the runway, right? And I remember laying in my cot and the airplanes as they took off would shake me out of my bed, right? But so I'm in Aviano and we were there for Bosnia. Was a big thing in the early 90s, mid 90s. And actually it was horrendous, right? It was a genocide. There was a lot of bad things happening in a beautiful country. And what I recognized in that deployment, being firsthand over that country and seeing the things that were happening, was the country that I grew up in, the one that I live in here in the United States, and many other countries in the world, but it just happened to be where I grew up in the US. We have our problems, but they're really not huge problems. I mean, there's things we got to tackle, don't get me wrong. But what I saw in Bosnia and what people can do to other people that look like them, that are like them, but have a different background. There was Muslims, there was Serbs, there was Croats that lived side by side for 60 years in apartment buildings, and they were under communist thumb, so they kept it quiet. But as soon as Tito and Yugoslavia came apart, they were shooting each other through the walls of their apartments because of 100-year-old disagreements that never went away. And I saw what terrible things could really happen. And so my moral compass has always been strong thanks to my mother. But I realized at that point that, there was some things that I was gonna do in this career that were gonna be pretty brutal. But the things that existed in the world were so horrendous sometimes. Like I came home from that deployment to my high school and college friends, and they wanted to know, hey, how was it? So I started laying it out. And their eyes kind of glossed over a little bit, and they just had no frame of reference because they never grew up in a world like that. They just couldn't put together what was really out there. And so I realized 10 minutes into hey, this is what I saw, this is where we're at, this is what we did, this is why, that all they wanted to hear was the Marine Corps was great and we were doing awesome. That's all they wanted to hear, because they could not put into a frame of reference the things that I was trying to describe to them that I saw. And that was in the Western world, right? That was in Europe that occurred, right? And it wasn't World War II, it was in the 90s, right? And there are other places in the world that are there's a lot of work that you do for people in countries that are, the things that go on in those countries are unbelievable. So I never had a personal moral dilemma about what I was asked to do or where I was asked to go, once again, because of my oath to the Constitution, and not to a person or even the Marine Corps or even, it was to the Constitution. So that kind of overcame a lot of that. But the things that I saw in the world that were our adversaries or the reason that we were deployed and doing it, shook my core as a young man. Really did. It was pretty incredible. And then I'm so grateful to come home.
For me, it would be I had a spiritual being a new Adventist. It was 2 years ago. We had this reserve symposium, an NSW reserve symposium, and they wanted to do it on a Saturday. So of course we know this is the Sabbath, and I'm like, well, Chief singing, Seventh Day Adventist, that's the Sabbath, XYZ. Had to route it all the way up. It was like, okay, well, we'll see you on Saturday. And I was like, okay, cool. I'll be there because then I had to kind of be rendered to Caesar what is due. So I was like, I signed up. I know this is the job. I'm gonna have to work when sometimes it's gonna be a conflict and I'm gonna have to draw a line. I drew it. Somebody with a heavier collar device erased perfectly fine. But I go, I do what they ask me to do. I show up 7 o'clock in the morning, help set up. The command master chief, who happened not to be in the building when I routed this chick, saw me. He was like, Rogers from Georgia, what the are you doing here? I thought you had to go to church. I was like, well, they told me I had to be here. He asked me who. I said, chain of command said that I needed to be here. He's like, go, I'll take care of it. Literally came here. I think it was 2 years. Y'all remember I came in here and I was in my uniform? That was literally the day I came in my NWUs and was at church in uniform because I left the command and came straight here because the CMC was like, go do what you're supposed to do. And this is back to Mrs. Miller's thing about the human factors. This CMC was aware that I was trying to be really strong in my faith and that could affect the human weapon system known as Petty Officer Rogers. So he was like, go home, go to church. If we need you, we'll call you, but go to church and don't have your phone on loud. So I knew then, I was like, okay, they won't need me. I'll just be here. Because it was a 2-day thing. It was Saturday and Sunday. So I could always have just come back for Sunday.
Against subjection, right? With some people, they'll ask you that before you join, right? If you have issue with at the end of the day, we are war fighters, right? That is something that we have to accept before we take this oath and when we choose to join the service. You know, if there is warfare, we must be willing to go and participate in that. But outside of that, which, you know, you should make your choice about that before you come in. I've never been asked to do anything that shook me morally that was a lawful order. I'll say that. I've had things that was asked of me to do from leadership that was not lawful, and I've questioned that at certain times. And when I was a much more junior sailor, you know, just saying yes to a lot of things, I didn't necessarily know how to question that properly, and that was from poor leadership, right? I mean, I had a chief that same thing. I was trying to, you know, take this time off on the Sabbath, and he broke out a Bible verse that said, you know, servants obey your masters, right? I'm like, you're taking that out of context, chief, right? But, you know, that was, you know, a poor leadership experience, right? And you know, when I became, and I got to a place, and I mean, I was very blessed that when I went to my first ship, a big giant carrier with 5,000 people on it, the chaplain was an Adventist chaplain, right? Who allowed me to worship with him whenever I needed to, right? So I do think the military is very aware of people's, specifically their religious beliefs and their thoughts to that, and we have a lot of room for that within what we do. But anytime I've been asked to do something that didn't sit right with me, it was because it was a poor moral decision from the person, not the service, if that makes sense, right? And so I've never seen my service. I disagree with policy for sure, but I've never had an order that's been issued to me that I disagree with. And I will say, at the end of the day, you know, everybody still has a latitude to obey or disobey that order as well, right? And you know, sometimes it's up to us to kind of decide that amongst our team, right? Like who those people are, because maybe we can't, you know, suffer someone like that in the right, you know, time. But I've never personally had something that shook me to that level or anything of that nature.
Things all the time. So if there's something that's questionable, you know, Vietnam, the big one was the My Lai massacre, right? And everybody knows what happened there. So if there's any question, or if somebody brings up something, there is a very in-depth investigation, and you get to the bottom of things. So everybody knows that that's going to happen. The truth will come out. You cannot hide the truth. So make sure your actions are above board. And you know, and the Marine Corps is good about this. They hold you accountable for what you knew at the moment and what you acted. They don't hold you accountable for the information that you got after that moment, because you can't. You know, that's, you know, looking back. But they're very good about that, and it is rigorous, and it can be absolute. And so that's part of the pride of being part of an organization like that I think works so hard, because they make mistakes. Military makes mistakes, but I think they figure them out and try not to make them again. So.
Well, thank Esther once again for putting this on. We appreciate you. And I think we as panelists here thank all of you guys for sitting here, participating, and sharing that with us. I'm sure it brings back great memories, and you know, it gives us a sense of pride to be able to talk and share some of the things that we've done and experienced. So we appreciate you guys for showing up and for being a part of this with us. Thank you.